What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. Welcome to episode 101. Last week, we recorded episode 100. It was a great episode, just kind of talking about how we got to this point, how the podcast has grown, and just kind of all of our troubles and accomplishments and all those things that we experienced along the way. So, thank you guys so much for supporting us. And this year, we are trying to put out a ton of good content that we go a bit more in depth into, try to make it a bit more educational, and just continue to do what we've been doing here. So, anyway, today's episode, we're going to be talking about the new updated vaccination schedule. And from there, we're going to talk about what things have changed, what things are the same, different risks associated with the ones that they have modified, as well as how things are contracted, you name it. So then that way, hopefully, we can provide a guide as to why they've changed these things and how you can make your best decisions for yourself, your children, you name it. So hopefully it's going to be a great one. I think that leaving medical decisions up to patients is a necessity in a free society. And so I think this is huge for healthcare in our country. That way everybody can make their own choice on things. So anyway, with that being said, Dr. Joel, how are you doing today?
Hey, good morning. I'm doing well. I'm so glad to be here. I think this will be really, really helpful for people. And Dr. Tim, our goal, I think, in a lot of this is to just provide a lot of the objective information with the V word, vaccines. People can get a little
V
bit,
word.
the V word. People can get a little bit, a little bit unsure, a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious
Hmm.
with that topic, and it can get very emotional very quickly. And that's certainly not our goal with things. Um, you know, People ask us questions all the time in our practices about things, and we love to share kind of our knowledge and what we know, and then our thoughts as well when asked for. And um, I think in this episode, our goal is to really just kind of share the objective information. It's like, let's all come together and let's look at this for the changes that have been made. And then, what this means or our conclusion or our thoughts that can kind of come later. But let's at least kind of look at this objectively and just look at it for what it is. So we've done a little bit of research here. We're going to talk about some different kind of stat and information on these things, and really hopefully talk about a lot of the questions around vaccines that most people, in my opinion, should be asking. And with any health treatment, a lot of the questions that we should be asking is, okay, is it necessary? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And then just trying to kind of weigh both of those out and decide, okay, what's going to be the best decision. Dr. Tim, we've talked about this here and there on the podcast, but there's a number of issues with our healthcare system in America, and some of that revolves around the patient not having the knowledge. And that's what we want to do in our episodes, is give people knowledge back so that they can make the decisions about their health. But one of the things that's been happening is, just over the years, is everyone is told, just trust your medical doctor. And you know I think especially through COVID, people have learned that no, you need to not just take it for whatever someone says, but you kind of need to understand and grow in that knowledge. And then, like you mentioned, letting the patient be the one that kind of drives a lot of the decisions. And that informed consent component there is so key with things. So we're going to talk about this new schedule, what's changed. We're going to talk about what diseases are they saying, hey, these are less important to treat. We're going to go through some of the statistics and numbers on, like, hey, are these really a significant risk to people and kids? What shots did they take off? We'll get into all this stuff today. So, Dr. Tim, let's kind of jump right in, and I'm sure it'll be a good one. So, overall, what's changed? So, Dr. Tim, our first point here is they reduced the number of diseases that they're saying we need to focus in on from 17 diseases down to 11 diseases. Dr. Tim, maybe let's kind of jump into some of these specific shots that they took off and diseases, and let's kind of talk about some of the statistics that we found, and maybe that's kind of led towards some of the decisions by Health and Human Services, and then making this change in the schedule.
Yeah, so for starters, I think one of the biggest reasons as to why they've changed this. So back in 2020, let me pull this up so I get all this information correct. There's a doctor, his name is Dr. Paul Thomas. And so he conducted a retrospective analysis study of kids in his practice who lifetime morbidity rates. Basically, what that means is what sort of diseases did they develop in the time frame of when they were, born, going through his pediatric office until they either left and just went to a primary care physician as adults, or at some point throughout their life where they ceased care with him. And so, what that study found was basically that long-term morbidity or disease rates in these children went down by a decent amount. And then also office visits throughout their childhood went down pretty significantly as well. And so the study demonstrated that vaccinations can, in some ways, affect the immune system and increase disease rates along the way. So they might have, great effects on the disease that they're trying to prevent in the first place. However, overall health outcomes are, I would argue, to be considered in addition to just one specific avenue of your health. Because with like hepatitis B, for example, you need to have, I believe it's uh, bodily fluids coming into contact in order to contract that. So either blood, saliva, any sort of thing along that line. And so if you are not exposed to that by basically going to some third world country that Hep B can be passed through, unclean water and, other things like that, or, transmission via mosquitoes and stuff like that, it's largely due to like being an STD, or rape victims will get it and things like that. And so, with that being the case, I mean, what really is the point of a baby getting it if mom doesn't have the disease and they're not planning on going to some, country where cleanliness is not a big thing? So that's just kind of the thought process behind all of this: is what is the likelihood that you're going to get whatever disease if you take the proper precautions to prevent it? And so, why vaccinate for things like that when it could have harmful effects on health outcomes down the road? So, that is a huge part of what it seems like RFK has been pushing, and why the Department of Health and Human Services has transitioned this. Because at the end of the day, if you want to vaccinate your kids, all the power to you. They are there to prevent disease. Most of them are studied pretty well. And, there's more research coming out recently, just like the one I just mentioned, where, yes, there may be some negative things outside of just the very narrow lens that we look at them through, but that still doesn't change the fact that you can be properly informed and consent to getting your children vaccinated if that's what you determine to be the best route of action, or best course of action. And so, on the other side of it, though, with research like this coming out and seeing that, rates of autoimmunity, rates of autism, rates of ADHD go up like crazy, and rates of just general infections go up like crazy too. Maybe not like crazy, but they do go up. There is a correlation with vaccinated children and those things becoming more prevalent. You can also opt to not do so many of these vaccines, and hopefully not be ousted from seeing your pediatrician and being excluded from, daycare and extracurricular activities and things like that. Like previously, unless there's pretty sometimes difficult exemptions to go through. So anyway, just kind of a side note with that. This is all, I would argue, with the goal of parents being able to actually make the decision for themselves and their families, as opposed to the government imposing on that too much. And so, I'm all about free society. There's measures that need to be taken sometimes with things, but when it comes to your health, only you and your doctor can truly determine whether or not you are at high risk for that. Any of these conditions. So, anyway, the list of things that they had changed, some of the big ones. So, vaccines like HPV, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, all those things have changed to, basically, they use the acronym SCDM, which is a acronym that stands for Shared Clinical Decision Making. It's a recommendation that can add an additional step to, or introduce other barriers to vaccine access, for the purpose of collaboration of parent or person who's getting vaccinated, who can consent to it, along with their primary care physician, making that decision together. And so you are sharing that clinical decision making between the person who's consenting to care as well as the doctor, which really, that in my opinion is how things should be. That is what informed consent is. You need to fully understand what you're getting yourself into.
Wow.
And so let's see, HPV, out of this list that they have changed, they do recommend one routine dose, but not two or three like they were previously recommending. And so that's changed. The rest of them, it just says this shared clinical decision making. So the next ones on the list are rotavirus, COVID, flu, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, all of your meningitis, and then RSV, and then dengue fever. And so the difference with all these things. So the COVID vaccine, the flu vaccine, those have those are both the mRNA vaccines that have basically been proven to not keep you from getting infected by something. And so with those being in the vaccination schedule previously, I mean, I would argue the goal of a vaccine should be this is going to prevent you from getting something. If you're absolutely going to prevent yourself from contracting some sort of disease that could seriously cause some problems like polio or something like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, but to have to keep going in and keep altering immune system function with a COVID-19 or a flu vaccine, we've seen research lately about myocarditis and these weird autoimmune things that are popping up in the wake of getting COVID vaccinations um, since 2020 or 2021 when they
Yep.
came out. And so
Yep.
I think it's probably a good idea that they took this off of there just because it's you should be able to make your decision on that one. Absolutely. It's not like it's going to cause some sort of epidemic, thing at this point where the vaccination, I'm sorry, all of these infections have modified and mutated at this point. And so they're less severe than when they first came around. And so,
Right.
I think that's appropriate. But the next one's on the list, hepatitis A, hepatitis B. I already talked about Hep B a little bit. Hepatitis A is mainly contracted through um, fecal oral contact or basically ingesting poop. And so there will be outbreaks of this every now and then. I feel like every couple of years I'll hear something in the news about, oh, there was a Hep A breakout at Taco Bell or something like that. And
Oh
everybody
my
just kind of
goodness.
laughs because it's kind of ironic, because there's jokes about Taco Bell, causing you all sorts of, gastro distress. And then,
It's a nice way to put it.
yeah, yeah. I think it's probably the best way you can put it. But it already causes issues, that make you not poop so great. And then from there, yeah, there must be somebody who didn't wash their hands and there's a transmission through, poop getting into the food, which not funny, but also ironic given given those jokes that go around. So, but anyway, I mean, that could be avoided, by cooking your own food and making sure that you do that stuff appropriately and maybe not eating Taco Bell like you probably shouldn't be anyway.
Yeah.
So I suppose I can see the logic behind that. And then these other ones, RSV, we'll have to get into that a little bit in a little while. Same with meningitis and then dengue fever. I mean, that one's exceptionally unlikely in the United States. And so to to alter recommendations for those, I mean, it makes sense. So anyway, with that being said, those are kind of the things that we're going to go through. So that's the list. It's your HPV, rotavirus, COVID, flu, Hep A, Hep B, meningitis, um, RSV, and your dengue fever. So with that being said, let's get into, or I guess, Dr. Joel, do you have anything
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
contribute to
just
that,
to
add to that?
yeah, just to maybe like clarify a couple of things, right? So one of the biggest changes that they made with this, which I think we're both very excited about, as far as just like giving the power back to the people, right, and allowing the patient to make more of the decisions for their health, is that they took what was generally just one big like required or recommended list of vaccines, and they took that into those three different categories. We touched on them a little bit, just to kind of mention them again, right? So there's there's we still have the first category, which is like, hey, these are recommended for all children. But then we have the next category, which is these are only recommended for certain high risk groups. And then there's that third category, and that's what you're talking about, the SCDM, which is the shared clinical decision making, which is kind of like it's that one's kind of like, hey, we don't necessarily think that these are dangerous so much that we need to recommend these for everybody or even high risk groups. But if it's one that you feel you need to take for your immune system, or if it's one that you feel like, your child needs, then between you and your doctor, you kind of work through that. In general, we talked about this a little bit. We're not the biggest fans of mandating things health wise when it comes to anything that's semi-controversial and things like that. We won't get into that too much, but we're excited that they've kind of specified these a little bit more. They've given us a little bit more information as far as like, okay, which ones help us prioritize, which ones are really needed, which ones are only needed in high risk individuals, and then which ones are more on the optional side and less maybe necessary. Dr. Tim, can you walk us through some of these? Do you want to walk us through some of these risks with some of these conditions? As far as like if you don't get the shots, like what's the likelihood with a lot of these that they took off the schedule? If you don't get the shot, what's the likelihood that you might actually contract some of these different conditions?
Yeah, let me walk through that. But before I do that,
Yeah.
just want to clarify the last three on this list. I did not look at this properly. So, meningitis B, and then RSV and dengue fever, those have not changed. So those have always been recommended for high risk populations or um, your SCDM. So anyway, the ones that have changed are your HPV, RV or rotavirus, flu, COVID, Hep A, Hep B, and then your meningitis ACWY. So it's just a different strain. So anyway, with that being said, let's get into the rates of infection of these things. All right, so what we got here. So rate of risk for HPV, at least from the sources that we pulled up, lifetime risk likely over 50%. So why is it that they are recommending only one dose as opposed to 2 to 3? I'm not entirely sure the whole 2 to 3 thing. I don't know. So the HPV vaccine, though, does not cover all the strains of HPV. So I don't want to say numbers, but from what I had learned previously and what I remember of that, it is less than 10% of the strains that are out there. So there's like 30, over 30, I think, strains. Does that sound correct to you, Dr. Joel?
Say that one more time. How many strains you
So
said?
how many strains of HPV do you recall there are, generally speaking?
Generally, I'm not even sure. I'd have
Oh,
to look that up.
okay. Here we go. There are over 200 strains, just a quick Google search. There are over 200 types of HPV, about 40 types infecting the genital area.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. How many strains of HPV are covered by the vaccine? So the current HPV vaccine is used to protect against 9 strains of HPV. So with over 40 affecting the genital area and over 200 strains being identified, I don't know about you, but I don't think that makes a ton of sense. But anyway, that's besides the point with what we're getting to here. So anyway, the rate of infection is decently high. The risks associated with it are also not exceptional. I know the biggest one is actually cervical cancer in women, which is, obviously a dangerous condition. However, the transition or transmission of HPV it's an STD. And so if you just have one partner or take proper precautions with, sexual activity, you won't get it. Of course, won't get it 100%. You can't say, but within a reasonable degree, if you take the proper measures or just are monogamous, you really shouldn't get it. And so, yes, the infections are higher, and lifetime risk is higher. However, that's because it's very easily transmitted sexually. So anyway, the next one on the list, flu. Obviously, a lot of people get the flu every single year, and so, but the vaccine, it doesn't cover. They try to predict what strain it's going to cover, and so it doesn't have great effectiveness. And if anything, they might say it helps, reduce symptoms, but at the same time, if you're going to get the flu anyway, I personally don't want to get a vaccine for that if I'm going to get the flu anyway. COVID, pretty similar. Numbers are looking at like 1 in 4, 1 to 7 people per year. Um, RSV, it says nearly all children are infected by H2, so high lifetime risk. However, the rate of hospitalizations and big problems with it are actually pretty low. Um, so let's see. What are the numbers here? So rate of hospitalization for RSV in infants or children under 5 is between 50,000 and 80,000 children per year. And so that is, let's do some quick math here. God, how many children? I don't think we've Googled stuff so much on the podcast before. So we've got like 73 million kids in the United States. 73 million divided by, what did I say, 50,000?
I thought you said 80.
80. 80 is the high end. So we'll just do 80. So that is a
So at most.
1 in 912 and a half per rate of children being hospitalized by RSV per year. So a 1 in roughly 1,000 chance. So less than 1% chance, 0.1% chance that a child will be hospitalized by that. So, I mean, 50,000 to 80,000 hospitalizations per year sounds pretty scary, but when you look at it statistically like that, especially if generally speaking you are pretty healthy, you don't have any comorbidities, things like that, it's not exceptional. I mean, obviously it could be better, but could be much worse as well. So next one on the list, rotavirus. It says nearly all unvaccinated children are infected by H5. However, rotavirus, there's really not any severe risk with this. Same thing is, roughly the same amount of children are hospitalized per year. The biggest risk is just dehydration though. And so it is a gastrointestinal infection. And so it will cause gastroenteritis type symptoms. So you're going to get really dehydrated, dry mouth, vomiting, diarrhea, things like that, electrolyte imbalance, all of the above. And so it can lead to dehydration, and that's really what most of the hospitalizations are involved with, is just getting fluids and then anti-nausea medications, stuff like that. So not really high rates of death and things like that. Next thing on the list, so Hep A, roughly 1 in 100,000 contractions or infections per year. Hep B, 1 in 20,000, and then both of your combined meningitis infections is going to be 1 in 100,000. And so those numbers are much less likely at that point. So given there's 300 million people in the United States, 1 in 100,000, we're looking at like 30,000 people per year. Let's see. Maybe my math is wrong. My brain's not working too great this morning, but either way, that's the rates for all these things. And given that a lot of these are not exceptionally likely or that they're not exceptionally dangerous, I think informed consent on these is great. Requiring children to get these or requiring people to get these for the sake of participating in any sort of extracurricular things or going on trips and things like that. I think it's kind of crazy that we impose that kind of stuff. And so I think hopefully this will make some change in that regard.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Anyway,
I'm glad.
did I miss anything with that?
No, I think you're good. I think you're good. Dr. Tim, I'm glad that you mentioned kind of that difference between like infection rate versus hospitalization rate, right? And the main reason I mentioned that is because, we talk about rotavirus, right, which is one of your kind of common colds that kids will get, or even just kind of the flu. How many kids get this and they're kind of down for 1 or 2 days? They get the sniffles, maybe they're down for 3 days, and then they just bounce back and they're fine. That is the overwhelming majority with things. And so one of the questions that kind of needs to be asked too when we talk about a lot of the vaccine schedule and different vaccines is, Are we trying to have a treatment that prevents us from ever getting sick, or from our kids ever getting sick with some of these viruses? Or are we just trying to help protect the kids from, maybe they get sick, but maybe it helps them to not be hospitalized, right? And then what are the likelihoods of all those things? So it should be information and questions that we should be asking that kind of give a little bit more insight and perspective to the entire conversation with things. But overall, Dr. Tim, what are some of the things that you're most excited about with these changes? What are some of the things that you are, maybe some other questions that you have? And Dr. Tim, just from going through this together, in our research and talking through it this morning, there's a lot of other questions I have that I'm excited to find and hopefully present in maybe some other episodes. But what are you excited about? What other questions do you have? Maybe what concerns do you have? What are you thinking when you walk through all this?
I'm hoping that this transition will hopefully destigmatize those who are not vaccinating their children,
Mm,
mainly because at the end of the day, everybody's medical decisions are their own to make.
yeah.
If you want to get them, great. If vaccinations protect you from getting sick, it is none of the business, it's not the business of those who are vaccinated to dictate and impose that on those who are unvaccinated. If you're
Mm,
protected and you're vaccinated, then you're great, good to go. But you shouldn't have to or be able to impose that on somebody else, in my opinion. And that's, it goes even beyond health stuff. I'm all about, like, when we were looking for houses, I didn't want to live in one that has an HOA or anything like that. You just do your own thing, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. And so in this circumstance, the lack of vaccination with these things should not impose on anybody else. You could say, oh, HPV, prevents you from getting HPV. What if you pass that to somebody else or whatever? But entering into the activity of which you would contract HPV is you hopefully are fully consenting to doing so. And so also you must take the proper precautions. If you are not married and you're not monogamous, however you want to go about it. Um, if there is some inherent risk with having unprotected sex with somebody who you don't know all that well. If you're just hooking up with somebody, you have to understand that there's risks associated with that. And you can't blame the person who could have something that they don't even know is there for not informing you of that. I mean, I think it's just like, saying you got to be a defensive driver. Yeah, you gotta do your best to protect yourself from others, because if you just blame somebody who's got road rage and driving around going crazy, maybe they have somebody in the hospital that's dying, that they're trying to fly to there, to see them, to say goodbye to them or whatever before they're pass away. You don't know what's going on in the background, so you can't just blame somebody else for what you could have protected yourself with. And I would argue the same logic would apply here. So hopefully, not only will it destigmatize things, because at the end of the day, I personally don't care what people think about the decisions that we'll make with our kids, because at the end of the day, they are our children, and what we decide to do is our choice, and that's
Right.
that. People can say what they want. I mean, words don't tend to hurt my feelings too much. But what I really hope it's going to change is, as maybe there is a wave of people that, I mean, I think there's already a wave, even without the government getting their hands on things. I do think there's a wave of people that are opening their eyes to this anyway, and have seen, especially through COVID, what healthcare has become. I mean, I've got nurses that'll come into my office. I've got, people that come into my office that work in healthcare all the time, and they're like, it's really not what it was. It is turned into a money making game, all that stuff, and that's
Yeah.
totally beyond anything that we, with our scope of practice, deal with and everything. Um, but it's just stuff that, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the same stuff. I mean, we had, Brooke Kanitz, the nurse practitioner. Who is she? I'm sorry, is she a PA or is she a nurse practitioner?
She's a nurse practitioner. Yeah.
That's what I thought. I don't know why I forgot that for a second, but nurse practitioner who we had on the podcast previously, who just actually quit practicing as a nurse practitioner for a couple of years because she couldn't stand what things had become, where it was just about, billing as much as you can and not about patient care and not actually taking care of people. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of people, I think, that are moving that direction to just try to do as few medical interventions as possible. And I feel like a lot of the logic that they have with the vaccines now is, um, the rates of these infections are so incredibly low, like measles, mumps, rubella, and all those things. With how few kids get it as is, or how few people get it as is these days, the people who are unvaccinated can reap that same benefit because there's just not as much infection around. And so there's not as many places to contract it from. And so I remember back in school when we had our microbiology class, I forget the phrasing that they use for it, but there's the benefit to be had directly by the vaccinations for yourself if you get them. But there's also the benefit to be had by those who don't get it because there's less infection to go around to infect
Mm,
those people who are unvaccinated. And so either way, I mean, if everybody weren't to be vaccinated, yeah, do I think some of these things would come back significantly? Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable, logical thought. However, hygiene is better these days. And so, I mean, the only way to know would be to have things swing the exact opposite direction and see what happens. But I think hopefully it will allow kids to participate in things without having to get, exemptions for religious purposes or, just regular. I don't know that whole process. All I know is I've had people complain about how difficult it is to get their kids into daycare, or if any kid at the daycare gets sick, they'll get a call and their kid has to go home if they're not vaccinated.
yeah.
And so automatically your kid's kind of seen as a loose cannon or a liability or the
Liability. Yeah.
source of all evil when it comes to the sickness that goes through a place. And
Right.
so now that we have seen that research of the long-term like office visits throughout childhood, maybe it's the kids that are vaccinated that are contracting all those things because their immune systems are dampened. And so mainly
Mm,
my positive thoughts that I have on it are kids will be able to just operate without stress on their parents to get all these exemptions going. And then also it won't be just like, kind of shunned if you don't get your kids vaccinated. Um,
yeah.
and then also I think another thing that I'm optimistic for is people just seeing that we've kind of taken a step back with it and maybe trying to take health matters into their own hands a bit more instead of just, oh, take a shot and you can do everything else and not worry
Right.
about your
Being
health.
passive.
Maybe we'll be encouraged to be more healthy and take care of ourselves better
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah, I love it. I think the thing I'm most excited about is probably twofold. It's one, just seeing the truth come out. There's over the years, as we've seen patients and done our own research, we've known that a lot of these shots were not necessary for kids to be healthy and that kind of thing. But just seeing, the powers that be, the Department of Human Health, Health and Human Services, the CDC, and so forth, seeing them actually publicize those things so that we don't feel like we are, you know, uh, thinking something, that's just not accurate or something like that. But seeing like, oh no, it's kind of been validated through that research. I'm thankful for that. I think it's going to provide a lot of better outcomes and just in general for health in America. And then two, I'm just excited for that a lot of the choice and decision being brought back to the family and the patients in kind of conjunction with the doctor. Whereas before it was just the doctor says this is what you do and you're supposed to listen. And the problem after that, if you have any questions or any pushback or any hesitation, is you're like threatened with either that your child's going to get sick and die, or they're going to call Child Protective Services. And so
Yeah.
we've got a line now, we've got a standard now that I think is going to just provide a lot more peace. It's going to provide a lot more of the decision making and freedom for the family, for the parents. And I think it's in a way better place right now. I think that there's still a lot of improvements to be made, but I think it's in a way better place. And there's a lot of questions still that we can answer here when it comes to vaccines. And it's like, for like, what is the thought process of those families and parents that don't vaccinate? And like, we could totally walk through that at some point. I think that no matter what you do, I think, the immune system can be strengthened naturally through the right things. And we can absolutely talk about that and how that impacts your ability to kind of get infected with these different sicknesses. And is there one approach that's better, going the standard schedule, the updated schedule, or going more natural with supplements, or a blend of both? Like, what is the best option? I think that there's some more data that we could present to our listeners, Dr. Tim, that I think would be helpful to possibly get into at some point. But Dr. Tim, I think that this has been great. This has been a good episode. I think we've gone through a lot of really good stuff. Anything else here before we kind of wrap up?
Especially with the topic, I think it's important to wrap up and mention it is not our scope of practice to try to comment on medications and recommend, prescribe, do all that stuff. And so all we're talking about here is stuff that we have researched, read research on. We are reading the Department of Health and Human Services website, things that they have changed, as well as the things that research articles have to provide on these topics. And so our opinions, things like that, have nothing to do with what you should be doing clinically. You should consult your prescribing physician. You should consult your doctor whenever you're trying to make any decisions about your health. Okay. And so do not just take what we have to say and just go willy-nilly with it and think that, we know all this stuff and everything. We are just trying to provoke thought and just educate you guys on what we've read in the news and give our take on what we think is going to change health-wise based off of the research that we have seen. So with that being the case, I think this has been a great episode. Obviously, there's more stuff we can get into with it. I feel like this topic is something that we can go quite deep down the rabbit hole with. However, maybe we do a part 2 and talk about more things with it. But for now, I think we covered really the big things that have changed, as well as maybe hopefully giving you guys some light bulbs in your head about why some of these things may not be absolutely necessary, or why these things have changed and the government decided to do so, just based off of, how deadly things are, how sick kids are going to get, yada, yada, so on and so forth. So anyway, I think this has been good stuff.
Yeah, it's been great. All right. Real quick, Dr. Joel Miller here, practice called Freedom Health and Wellness. We're in Flower Mound, Texas. If you guys have any questions, you can look me up online at drjoelmiller.com or on Instagram. It's just drjoelmiller. If you guys have any questions or need any direction on things health related, check it out. We also have tons of podcast episodes, guys, that we've done on different conditions. Go into Spotify or Apple and search up on our page. We've probably talked about it. And if we haven't, reach out to us, let us know, and we'll definitely consider making an episode about it.
And I'm Dr. Tim Augustiniak here in Bentonville, Arkansas at Flourish Functional Wellness Center. If you want to find us online, or find me online, my website is draugustiniak.com or flourishfwc.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach me at those websites. On there, you can find links to all the socials and everything. And don't hesitate to reach out. This is episode 101. And so we need help coming up with things to talk about with what you guys want to hear. So just let us know. And thanks everybody for listening. Hope you guys have a good one, and we will see you in the next one.